Hello, I'm Jean-Philippe Courtois. Welcome to another edition of Positive Leadership, the podcast that helps you grow as an individual, as a leader, and ultimately as a global citizen. While data-driven analysis and logical reasoning are important for business decision-making, intuition also plays a vital role, from enabling leaders to open up and explore new and exciting avenues, to challenging conventional wisdom and generating fresh ideas that can drive business growth. My next guest, through scientific analysis, explores the importance and efficacy of trusting your gut instinct and using your intuition in harmony with rational thinking. With a background in psychiatry, she is convinced of our ability to alter how our brains works and transform our lives by thinking in a more integrated way. Dr. Tara Swart has many strings to her bow. She's a neuroscientist, medical doctor, executive coach, author, and I believe many other things that she will share with us. In her influential book, The Source, she explores ways in which we can take control of our greatest assets, our brain, and harness its incredible power to live a healthy, happy, and fulfilling life, with tips and strategies to not only cope but thrive in our ever-increasingly fast-paced life. It's an essential toolkit backed up by scientific analysis and research. Tara, it's a huge pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and that was a wonderful summary, Jean-Philippe.
So Tara, I'd love to start at the very beginning, if I may. You grew up with a real clash of cultures, I think, it looks like, at least from remote. Your home life centered on practices that your parents brought over to the UK from India, such as yoga, mindfulness, and the belief in reincarnation as well. How did their values and beliefs shape who you become? And later on, how much of a conflict, if any, did you have to resolve between your scientific studies and Indian tradition, beliefs, and rituals?
Great question. So I would say that their values and practices shaped me in both a push and a pull way. So, for example, things like the fact that I became a medical doctor and did my PhD, they were things that my parents very much wanted, and which set me up with a great foundation, obviously, but also led to the fact that in my mid-30s, I woke up one day and thought I didn't really choose those things. And if I could do whatever I want to do, and, a lot of the reason I did medicine and did the PhD was because people said, you're so smart, you could do this. So I thought, okay, if I'm really that smart, what could I do that I actually want to do? So it was, it sort of set me up really well, but then also made me question things. And then certainly as a child, and again, up until my mid-30s, so in my mid-30s, I changed career and I got divorced from my first marriage. And so that's when, in fact, all the kind of practices that I tried to keep really separate, because I just wanted to be a normal kid growing up in London, and all my friends were British. And that's when I thought, okay, I need to do something different. I need to work out how to come out of this better and stronger. And what really appealed to me then was both Jungian psychology, but also a lot of Buddhist practices and beliefs. So things started to come together for the first time then, I would say. And also, by then, yoga had become quite mainstream. So I'd gone from sort of feeling really embarrassed if I came home from school and my mother was in a headstand to thinking yoga was really cool. So it started there, and obviously it culminated in me writing my book, which I know we're going to come to.
Yeah, super. So it looks like, along the years of your, different steps in your life, you've been reconciling yourself with some of your Indian traditions and rituals and roots, while you decide as well on the path that you wanted to take yourself. So it's very interesting to see this nuanced approach of taking aboard when needed the traditions from your roots and take your own path as well. I believe you felt either an implied or very real sense of pressure to pursue a career in medicine. This is what you said, I think, implied in your... I was also interested to read that at school, at one point, you are told certain things that really define how you identify yourself. One of your teachers, I think, told you that you are not very creative, which I'm sure has been like a huge shock for you at a young age you had, like all the statements that we get from teachers, sometimes parents or so-called good friends in early age, which can be devastating. I think most of us can relate to feeling that our character, abilities and weaknesses well, not only assessed, but quite often declared as facts.
Yeah.
And at such a tender age by very influential people. And I think it's not easy, but it's actually vital just to not accept to be defined by what others have to say about you, about ourselves. So that's, I guess, the reason why you moved into psychiatry and then describe actually feeling worn down over time and questioning of the job and a role that you played with your patients' overall well-being. So my question is really about the journey you went on questioning your life and career choices, Tara. It must have been, daunting, living on one end a very comfortable and well-defined career path, the psychiatrist, to get onto a very unknown road and path for the future, right? Tell us more about that reinvention of yourself.
Oh, wow. So, there's so much there because I had an enormous amount of pressure to become a medical doctor. It was almost predestined for me since before I was even really conscious. But when I look back, I think, I was good at languages. I loved history and geography. But I was told that those things wouldn't give me a secure career. So, I wasn't to pursue those things. But, and also the creativity comment came from the fact that I wasn't good at drawing in art. Oh. And so the specific point was, you're not good at art, that means you're not creative. And I think I was about 15 at the time. So I believed that to be true.
Wow.
So, I made my decisions on the basis that you can't get a proper job if you study languages or humanities. I'm not creative. And, I was good at science and math. So I thought I better do that. And then, interestingly, it was quite disappointing for my parents that I chose to become a psychiatrist and not a neurologist or a surgeon because it wasn't seen as like proper medicine. But it did give me a massive insight into the way that people think, the way that your brain can change what you believe, your mood, how you perceive things. And ultimately, in where I was working in the government hospitals, it was the lowest socioeconomic classes of people, and there was nothing proactive. There was nothing to do with well-being. It was just about fixing really big problems. And that's probably what became demotivating for me in the end.
Because did you feel unequipped, actually, in terms of what you could bring to those people, given again, the depths of the issues, where it came from? What was the challenge for you at the time, actually?
No. It was... I felt very equipped to diagnose mental illnesses and prescribe the right medication, but I felt like my impact ended with that person. Often they've been like abandoned by their families, they don't have a job. Yeah. And I just started to think, well, basically, if I could work with someone like you, then, I know you have a family, you have a big team, you're part of a huge business that has corporate social responsibility. I felt like my impact could be much bigger if I was, working in that, and also working with healthy brains that could be even better and, have this big influence on the world and not just constantly, trying to solve problems that were just recurring. I loved my job and I was good at it, but I felt like I wasn't learning anything new and it was just a very negative view of the world. And I didn't really even understand then as much as I do now that what you feed your brain every day through the news, through social media, through the people that you interact with, that has a really big impact on your brain and your life. So, but, medicine is a vocational degree, so I didn't really know what else I could do, if anything. And then a friend of mine who had also done a PhD in neuroscience but had gone to work for one of the big consulting firms, she said to me, there's an overlap between what you do and what I do, and it's called executive coaching. So I started looking into that, and it really seemed to fit the sort of, I was very driven and goal-orientated, but also quite zen, had lots of psychological skills in it. So that became really interesting, and she and I were going to sort of set something up together, but then her circumstances changed and she couldn't. But by that point, I'd got to the place in my brain where I thought, I'm going to do this anyway. And that was quite crazy for me at the time because, like you said, I'd only ever had a stable job. I'd become quite senior in my job. And I literally had to start again from the bottom.
From the start again,
I did a coaching course. I started working as an office manager. And, the skills that I had, they weren't very transferable for being an office manager. So it was a hard 6 months. But I had that mixture of being nervous and excited, which I've learned now is a really good sign that you're on the right path.
It's a good formula, yeah. No, I think we'll come back actually, Tara, later on in our dialogue. I'd like to come back later on the impact and the way you define impact in your life, because I think it's a very profound question that we ask ourselves in this podcast pretty often, in the way people change career paths or missions in their lives because of that. Also want to come back to this moment where on one end professionally you decide to take a very different path that you just described. At the same time, I think you also was a time where you had a breakdown, of course, a very important relationship that you alluded to as well. And it took obviously some great courage, wisdom, and also a lot of positivity in your brain, I think, for sure at the time, to make that bold move. So can you tell us about taking that drastic step again, both personally and professionally at the same time? It looks like, wow, very few of us would take both challenges at the same time. And how did you weather the storm? What did you do on your brain, on yourself, yoga, meditation, or something else to give you the confidence that you could actually tackle both challenges?
So obviously I didn't choose for both of those things to happen at the same time, but they did. And I'm sure there was some interrelation between the decision to change career and, how that changed my relationship. And some of my friends said, like, how many things do you want to change at once? Because I also moved countries. I was living and working in Bermuda. But as a result of the two other things changing, I decided to return home to London, which helped. So being back in my territory with my friends, my family, a familiar, language and places and everything, that helped. And like I said, I did start reading a lot about Buddhism and Jungian psychology. And then I discovered a book called, this book had come into my life 5 years earlier when I was, happily married and, doing my career. So I'd read it, but I hadn't done any of the exercises. And it was a book from 1926 that originally came out weekly in the newspaper, each chapter. And you had to do a certain exercise each week. And it was kind of mind and body, but ultimately it was to be able to optimize your mind and have the largest extent of control over it that anyone can have. So eventually I came around to thinking, okay, I need to do this. And I did it. It took me 6 months of solid, regular practice. And it was really life-changing for me. So,
and did you do it by yourself, or were you supported, mentored, coached by someone else to help you on the practice?
So I did that by myself, but in the meantime, I had both therapy and coaching. So I believe in asking for help, but I also really believe that at some point you've got to take responsibility for your own. It's
pretty amazing to hear that actually this content was published in 1926, you said, right? Like a century ago.
I know.
It's really
it's almost a century now.
Yeah, to think about what is life today back, versus a century ago. Wow, that's very interesting, I find.
But actually, if you think about it, if you go, so for example, if you go back to my roots, to the Vedic texts, they were the first books that, a lot of other kind of spiritual beliefs have come from. But then, if you think of the Greek philosophers, the Bible, this kind of thing has been around for a really long time. And I think either as an individual or as a community, we go through ups and downs where we need to reach out for those sorts of things more. Again, I think COVID is an example post which, there's a lot of mental suffering going on. And so I think the popularity of those sorts of things is on the rise again.
No, absolutely. It's very interesting to see in a way, the search for more spirituality, I think, for most people, and hence coming back to some very old traditions, actually, from our ancestors. I like to come back and get a bit deeper, Tara, on the way you've been working on your identity. And I had a chance to have a common friend of both of us, Hermania Ibarra, that I hosted on my podcast. So people who have not heard, about Hermania Ibarra's book, she wrote this book called Working Identity. In this book, she explores the process of creating a more fulfilling future, reinventing oneself, and finding the confidence to make career transitions. I had the pleasure to speak to her. In her book, she talks about a few unconventional strategies for reinventing your career, such as start changing what you do and don't try to discover yourself by introspection, which sounds like counterintuitive. Or stop trying to find your true self, which is, something I had many of my guests talking about in my podcast, to be honest. And focus on your attention on which of your many possible selves you want to test and learn more about. In other words, it's about practicing some different selves of yourself by being an entrepreneur of your life. My words, not Herminia's words. So I love to hear about the way, maybe or not, our book influenced yourself and the kind of change it helped you implement at the time you made all those big changes in your life.
Yeah. So I agree with you. It sounds counterintuitive, but actually I agree that you can spend a lot of time, like I said, I'd read that book, but never done the exercises. And even when I speak about vision boards, I call them action boards because you can't just sit at home and create a fantasy of the life that you want and not do anything. So I get what she's saying, which is go out there and do something differently and see what works and what doesn't work. I think we do need to do some introspection, but you could introspect for the rest of your life and never change anything. So
Exactly.
I agree with that. For me, the impact that her book had was that it gave me examples of people that had made really massive career changes because I didn't have any, I think, or certainly not many examples of that in my own life, and especially not out of medicine.
Yes, for sure.
I know a lot more doctors now who've changed career, but at the time that I did, I didn't know anyone. So just her case studies that showed that people did it, but also the process that they went through, that just made me believe that I could. And that's actually really important in your brain. So the most famous example of that is when Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
Before that, we didn't think it was possible for a human to do it. But as soon as he did, sub 4 minutes, in the next 2 or 3 months, 7 or 8 other people did it too. Knowing that it's possible, that's what Herminia's book gave for me personally.
Well, I love it. And just to keep building on that, I love to talk about the way you move from introspection to action. And the way you have to actually, in a way, starting to set your own goals, big and small, and your intentions. And I know that's something very important for you as well. Tara will discuss about the tools and the ways you advise people to do that. We all have learned, at least in business and in different business circles, that you need to define your SMART goals, right? Isn't it? So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bounded. I've learned that myself, for decades. I recently exchanged with a friend of mine who was on my podcast, Michael Bungestani, about his latest book, How to Begin. Start Doing Something That Matters. That's the name of the books. And in these books, Michael provides practical tools to define what he calls your worthy goals. A goal that should be thrilling, important, and daunting. And he has defined a 3-steps process. Number 1, set your worthy goal. And of course, there's a lot of meat around the bone on that. Number 2, commit. And number 3, cross the threshold. So Tara, you're obviously doing a lot of that differently, offering your own approach that you detail in your bestseller book, which is a wonderful book I would advise to all our listeners, The Source. And you say, what is key to remember is that our intention and focus are at their strongest when our goals align with our deepest life choices and values. This really resonated a lot with me. And you are proposing methodology which is very visual, pictorial, and has different steps. So can you share with us the next stepping stones, journaling, action boards, visualization, and unpack them a little to make the process of making goals, intentions, a more actionable reality for us? And if I may add, I know it's a long question, why don't, because I heard you talk about that, was funny, why don't you start telling us what your first visualization board would look like in your bathroom, understand? So if I was invited in your home, understand, maybe asking where's the bathroom, Tara, Oh, I could have bumped into a very interesting picture. Can you tell us about the picture, and then you can unpack maybe the whole process if you don't mind?
Yeah, well, Jean-Philippe, because it was such an amazing but long question, I've actually got 4 points that I don't want to forget.
Let's go through them one by one.
So the first one is, it was interesting what you said about Michael's 3 steps, because when I changed career, and because I also got divorced at the same time, I was so poor at one point that I didn't even know if I could pay my rent or my bills. And people said to me, you could go and just do like one weekend as a doctor and you wouldn't have to worry about money for the next few months. But for me, I had to burn my bridges. If I went backwards to being a doctor, I would feel like I had failed. I had to give myself that no option but succeed. Wow. So that's what happened there. And now, obviously, I'm not in that position, but I recreate that for myself. Every so often, if things start to plateau, I'm like, okay, what can I do that's new and different? Because I can't just keep doing the same thing. So I'll actually set myself almost like I have to do something different to survive. But now it's luckily not so much about survival. It's more about thriving.
And you said 100% different. You didn't make any compromise saying, I'm going to do some medical practice on one end and do something else as well.
No.
To hedge my bets. Actually, you decided just to go all the way into the unknown.
Yeah.
Which was very courageous.
And, that's not right for everyone. I know people who've successfully kept a part-time job whilst they're starting up a business, but that was instinctive to me.
Yeah.
And now I've understood that if I don't keep making myself do that, then I'm just going to, sort of not stop growing. And then I wanted to pick up on what you said about intention. So you used a really nice quote, but I just want to add to that for reasons that we don't fully understand, but have huge implications in business, your intention behind any action completely changes the impact of that action on your brain and therefore in your life. So, for example, I do time-restricted eating, which means I don't eat breakfast. I only eat between 12 noon and 8 p.m. And that has a very positive effect, not just on your physicality, but also on your mental resilience.
Yes.
If, let's say you, just for example, you're so busy that sometimes you just forget to eat breakfast. So, usually you do eat 3 meals a day, but sometimes you're so stressed, you're traveling, you just skip a meal.
Skip it. Yeah.
That has completely the opposite effect on your brain and your body. So it's essentially the same action, which is I'm eating 2 meals a day, or I'm eating, less than I used to eat. But the impact on your mental and physical power is opposite. And it's also the same with the difference between daydreaming, which is where you're sat at your desk and you're supposed to be focusing on a task, but you find that for 15 minutes you've been thinking about something else. So that's not good for your brain. But if you do intentional mind wandering, so if you say, okay, I'm going to put the laptop lid down and I'm going to give myself 20 minutes to just think, like maybe come up with some ideas, but let my mind wander.
Go.
That's really positive for the brain. So I think that's a very actionable point for your listeners.
Very good.
But which is related to what I was actually saying in the quote, was that your head, your heart and your gut, so your logic, your emotion and your intuition have to be aligned. If logic's telling you to do something, but in your gut it feels wrong,
it's not there.
It's not going to work. Okay, so on to vision board.
onto the bathroom. Yes.
The bathroom. So that was the first year when I had started up my executive coaching practice, and I was living alone for the first time, and because it was a period of transition for me, I was probably more mindful than I would be now. Let's say of who I actually allowed into my home. So it was really only close old friends. And there was only one bathroom. So if they needed to go to the bathroom, they would definitely see my vision board. And I'm a strong believer in that, because when people make these boards, they often hide them away because they don't want anybody else to see them. But then if I was coaching an executive, I would say, what is it about what's on the board that you don't want people to see, and what does that mean about your sense of worthiness and deserving of what's on the board? So on that board I actually had the specific sum of money that I wanted to earn in that next year, and I don't know what it's like in France, but in Britain, we don't really talk about how much we earn or how much we want to earn.
Oh, even worse in France, actually. So.
Well, so okay, yeah. So, it's not something I would go around telling people, but like I said, I knew that if they went to the bathroom, they would see that.
Yes.
It also had some elements of travel, but related to business, because I wanted to, grow, not just work in England. And then because at the time I was renting, I was actually still living in the apartment that I had lived with my first husband in. It had some, sort of homes that I would want to buy. Yep. Pictures of homes. So that was that was on the first pretty much that. It was quite simple, the first one.
Huh. And was there a special positioning in the painting where the money is somewhere on a painting versus where home is? Is there a technique for people?
So it has to mean something to you. I tend to group things together. So I would have the home things in one section and then business things in a different section. And then I would decide if they might actually be touching or completely separate. So, for example, now the way that I work, I work for myself. I largely work from home. Home and work would definitely be overlapping, but at times that wasn't the case. Something I've learned over time is to not completely fill the board and leave space, because that's waiting for opportunities that you haven't, thought of yet, which I quite like. And then later, I would put certain things. So on the left-hand side, so anything at the top was probably top priority.
Yes.
Anything at the bottom was quite like foundational to how I wanted my life to be. Mm-hmm. Anything on the left-hand side would be more to do with like love and family. Yep. But that's just what I decided. It's not the rules for everyone. It's just what's right for you. Yeah. As long as you know what it means and why it's there.
No, quite amazing. You made a couple of comments, Tara, about the fact you kept some open spaces, right? So that you can update in a way your vision. Or are you repainting or designing the whole actually picture every year, every couple of years? What is the practice you're encouraging people to do? And then love you to talk about the way you actually move from the picture, the painting, to action. How do you do that?
Great question. So I would advise people to do a new one every year.
Okay.
I would say in the last 15 years, there's been one or two where pretty much I've just wanted more of the same. So I've maybe kept it and just removed a few things and stuck some new things on. But mostly I change it every year. As with any kind of behavior change or goal setting, there are always some things that are quicker wins and some things that take longer. And occasionally something would go from this year into next year because it wasn't completed yet. And that's okay. And then, so the reason for doing the board and having it somewhere visible is that you are continually priming your brain to remember that these are the things that you want.
Every day in the bathroom, boom,
exactly.
You look at yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So, at least twice a day, but maybe more than that as well. So because we're very busy, we have tasks that absolutely have to be done in the real world. Which mean that the places I'd love to travel to or the dream client that I'd love to get in the next year might not be my top priority every single day if I'm trying to just get my life sort of under control. And so your brain naturally will filter out the things that it doesn't consider to be important, and it will direct your attention to the things that it does consider crucial to your survival. And it will tag them in order of importance. Your brain does that without you even realizing.
All the time,
All the time. I mean, so this is the reason that you're not feeling your clothes on your body all day because you don't need to. But actually, something is touching your skin, most of your skin all day. We were talking about that book that was written a century ago. Well, if you read one newspaper today's newspaper, you would receive as much information as somebody would in their entire life 100 years ago.
True.
And even then, the brain was naturally filtering and, selecting and tagging. So by repeatedly putting this imagery in front of your eyes, you're changing the order of the tagging. So you're bringing those things to the top of the tagging. And that means that compared to me on a really busy day where I'm just running from meeting to meeting and I don't really have time to notice things, it might be that I pass you in the corridor and actually I do have something to ask you, which I'm going to ask you at the end of the podcast. And I would think, why not just ask him? The worst thing he can do is say no. So there's something on my mind that I would like to achieve, and I see you and I think that you could help me with it. It would make me much more likely to think, okay, this is a person that could help me. Let me ask him for help.
No, super. I mean, what's really interesting in your approach, Tara, is the way you said the visuals, right? Obviously influence your brains every single day to keep you prioritizing the key things that matter the most, short-term, mid-term, and long-term as well, because you have different horizons on the painting. Things that absolutely matter, like every day of your life, you got to do it. Others are super critical for the future that you may have to plan for at one point in your days. And the fact you're confronted with that every day is obviously a great way to, I guess, to shape your action board as well, which was the connection point between the visualization board and the action board.
Yeah.
So in my podcast, Tara, I had the opportunity to learn a lot about the power of positive psychology, and I know you know so much about it. I had wonderful guests like Kim Cameron, Barbara Fredrickson, Ilona Bonniwell, or Gila Clarakisus, and they shared, of course, not just their passion, their studies, but how they apply it to their careers and what they do in their lives. So I'd like to get deeper into the neurosciences, because you obviously are a practitioner. And I'd love to hear the scientific background behind the law of attraction that you define in your book, Again, the Source. So can you walk us through the principles of that law? How does it work?
Okay. So the laws of attraction are, very long-standing, mostly seen as spiritual, even maybe a bit woo-woo, which kind of means not really backed up by anything that people find very solid or they can understand, or certainly not backed by empirical data, and which for a long time was explained by quantum science, and often explained using quantum science language by people that weren't actually quantum scientists. And I think this led to some misunderstandings, like, let's say an obvious possible explanation of the law of attraction is that if you think good thoughts, you attract good things into your life. But then there was a huge backlash, which was, well, if I get a disease or I lose a loved one or a war happens in my country, does that mean it's because I was thinking bad things? And that's not, we don't want people to feel like that at all, because there's no basis for that being true. Yeah. And so I just started to think that I liked some of these ideas that you can attract good things into your life, but as a cognitive scientist, I wanted to be able to explain it with psychology and neuroscience, but I also wanted to feel like I had agency and responsibility, and it's not just something in the universe that makes these things happen.
Happens to you.
Because I felt like that was just much more empowering as well. So one summer in France, actually, I just thought, let me just out of curiosity, see what these laws are and see if I can align them to anything from cognitive science. And I was amazed that sort of 80-90% of it was just very obvious to me how that was explained by the power of your brain. And then there were maybe like I said, 10-20% I couldn't really fully explain, but I thought it's definitely not going to harm you. In medicine you go on this principle, do no harm. So I sort of thought, okay, I don't feel like there's a fact behind those things, but it's not going to harm me to include it, so people can include it or not include it. But if I distilled it down to the parts that were explained by science, and the first part was having an abundant mindset. So if you go through life saying things like that never happened to me, or that's not going to work out for me, then that's probably going to become true. If you can regulate your emotions so that you're spending less time feeling fear or shame or anger and more time feeling joy and excitement and trust, then you're actually shifting the balance of hormones that are going around your brain and your body. So you're moving away from the stress hormone cortisol and you're moving more towards the bonding hormone oxytocin.
Yeah.
When you have high levels of cortisol, which in the modern world, it's just so easy for us to have like all the time, your brain will actually reroute the blood flow around your brain and move it away from the higher functions like creativity and problem solving and flexible thinking, because you don't need those to survive.
Yeah.
To survive, you've got to wake up in the morning and come and sit at your desk and do a minimal amount on your job so you don't get fired.
Yeah.
But so at the time that you need it the most, your blood flow can actually really go against you and make it very hard to think outside of the box or, you know, solve a problem. If you're at the other end of the spectrum, you've got more of this trust and bonding hormone going around your brain-body system, then you're more likely to take healthy risks. You're more likely to lower your guard. You're more likely to collaborate and think creatively. So you can already see how that's going to lead to a better outcome. Secondly is what I call magnetic desire. And it goes back to what we mentioned already, which is the alignment of your head, your heart, and your gut. So the magnetic desire is an emotion that is so strong that even if it feels like things aren't working out, you maintain your motivation. So, you know, you can see the difference between people that go through a struggle for something and some people give up and it was almost just around the corner, and some people keep going and then they become hugely successful. So that's the second part. The third part is manifestation, which sounds like a very woo-woo word, but it actually is basically it's goal setting. It's saying, these are the things I want in my life. This is what I'm going to do to, you know, bring those things into my life, and actually going out there and doing them. And these are things like asking for a pay rise, you know, trying to get a promotion, trying to get more travel opportunities, learning opportunities. If you just sit at your desk and you never ask, you're probably not going to get those things.
Sure.
Then it goes into a slightly different mode for the last three, which next comes patience. And the reason that I've included that is because when you are making changes in your life, you're physically creating new and different pathways or overwriting existing pathways in your brain.
In your brain,
And before we had brain scanning, we would just think of that as psychological work and not understand that it's actually physically laying down pathways. It's like building a brick wall.
Plastically,
So what happens is there's a tipping point where you're trying to change and it feels like nothing's changing, and suddenly it's like, oh, this is, you know, this is how I operate now. This feels more natural and comfortable. And it's because it takes time for those neurons to connect up together. And so you've got to keep going until you get to that point where this becomes your more natural behavior. But up until that, then it's quite a struggle. And then there's harmony, which is both about the harmony between, well, I've talked about head, heart and gut, but there's actually 6 ways of thinking. So I define them as logical, emotional, motivation, physicality, which is the brain-body connection, intuition, and creativity. So it's about those being integrated as much as possible. But it's also about harmony within yourself, between yourself and other people, let's say in a team, and then also in a broader way, that you're not trying to do something that's actually going to have a negative impact on society or something like that. And that's kind of very closely related to universal connection, which is the fact that in some ways that we understand scientifically and in some ways that we don't yet, we're much more connected than we believe. So we mostly communicate with each other through articulated language, because we've evolved in that way, and it's the easiest way to say, you know, if I say, Jean-Louis, do you want to be on my podcast? If you say yes, I think that's the truth. But if you say yes and you're shaking your head like this at the same time, I might think, he's just saying yes to me, but he's not going to come back to me. And then if we were in the same room together and you had high levels of the stress hormone because you're trying to get me out of the door so that I can't ask you to be on my podcast anymore, then I would actually physiologically be aware of that on a subconscious level. So at minimum, we communicate through speech, through body language, and through hormones. And then there's other things that we can't explain. Like in the first lockdown, a journalist called me up and said, there's a global phenomenon of vivid dreaming. People having dreams that seem like they're completely real and they're sort of anxiety based.
Yeah.
And I actually was so surprised because it had happened to me and I didn't realize it was a global phenomenon. So I did my research to help her with the article, and it turns out that the last time that happened was during the World Wars. So when everybody in the world, no matter what country, how rich you are, what your life circumstances are, is faced with this common threat,
same challenge,
same things happen in the brain,
No, really fascinating the way you articulated all the steps, Tara. I'd love to come back a little bit more actually on the abundance mindset. And we had a number of guests where we discussed, of course, the growth mindset as well, and the way. And I think particularly I'd love to hear from you the way everyone, whatever your age is, it's not just a question of being a kid, because I know there's a lot of things happening when you're a child, but actually you still have some ups when you're 60 or senior. I'm talking about that because there's a lot of challenges for, mixing generation of people these days across nations.
Yeah.
So what would be your kind of practical advice for people of any generation to start working again on the plasticity of their brains and show them that they can actually do it? They can learn new languages, maybe not as easily as you did yourself. I understand you speak 5-6 languages, including some French. Je crois que tu parles très bien français aussi.
Merci.
Voilà, on n'a pas pratiqué ensemble, mais je crois que c'est le cas. So can you give us some strong, nice, kind encouragement about, hey, you can learn new things tomorrow? How do you do that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's probably one of the most exciting things that's come out of neuroscience research in the last 20 years. This ability, so neuroplasticity, which is the ability to change your brain, but the fact that it doesn't stop like we used to think around the age of 18 when you stop physically growing. In fact, it's very, very pronounced in the first 2 years of life. If you think a baby goes from being completely helpless and vulnerable to walking, talking, managing their bowels and their bladder, and, potentially talking up to 5 languages. And then there's another, it's different because it's more about neural pruning, but there's another big change in the teenage years.
Yep.
And then this process is actually very active until the age of 25, so later than we thought. Which is interesting because what we thought of as the adolescent brain actually it's the adolescent brain, whilst people are much older. And I think what a lot of people, of our generation have seen is that our children tend to become now financially dependent on us for longer as well. And that actually makes sense with the neuroscience because, before it was like, you're 18, go to war or go out and get a job. But actually that's not matching up with how the brain's working. So then from 25 to at least 65, and I have definitely got examples of people even over the age of 65 that are harnessing neuroplasticity. Yeah. It's there, but you have to essentially use it or not lose it, but kind of it slows down. And the main way to keep inducing neuroplasticity in your brain throughout adulthood or throughout working life specifically is by learning new things. Now, something like a language or a musical instrument is such an intense learning that it actually, it visibly changes people's brains. And you wouldn't just get the benefits of, let's say somebody learned French later in life. You wouldn't just get the benefit of you can go to France on holiday and you can, order your meal. Because it changes your brain globally, you would get benefits like better emotional regulation, better flexibility of thinking, better problem-solving skills, better ability to override your biases, super important at work. But those are quite big things, and a lot of people with a busy job are going to say, I don't have time to learn a new language. But try to do something new and different as frequently as you can. Go to a country that you've never been to before. Cook a meal that you've never cooked before. Talk to somebody that comes from a completely different background to you. Just constantly be doing what I would call micro-learnings, which is just doing things differently to what you've always done before.
No, I love it because I know there's also a lot of, writings on the 10,000 hours you need, right, to get to your craft and a new skill and a new capability. But you said, well, of course, that's probably true, and it's been proven actually in many different ways, but you don't necessarily need to apply 10,000 hours to everything that you want to discover in life. I think that's, in essence, what you're sharing with us.
I actually do something which I think people would almost call cheating, but I will learn something until I can tell that I've gone past that tipping point of neuroplasticity. So, for example, the last language that I tried to learn was Danish.
Yeah.
And it was really difficult.
Wow.
And I did it for about 6 months. I went to Denmark in the summer.
Yep.
And then I came back, and cause I used to have these 90-minute lessons. But because it was such hard work, I would get really, really hungry and tired, usually about after an hour. And after about 6 months, I had the lesson after I'd been away for the summer. And then she said, okay, well, we're done for today. And I was just amazed that it had been 1.5 hours because... Yeah. It was just seemed easy. And so then I thought, okay, I'm not really enjoying Danish, I have to be honest. But it's obviously changed my brain.
It did.
So with that one, I stopped there. And then with tennis, like probably everybody else, I started playing tennis again in the lockdowns. And once I got to the point where I realized all of that muscle memory from being a teenager had come back. Yeah. I kind of felt like, okay, I don't really need to do it anymore. But there are other things that I have kept doing. I'd like to make that very clear. But there's a couple of things that I found more challenging. I just did it until I felt like it had the neuroplasticity impact that I wanted.
Yeah. No, excellent actually to share that experience, Tara, with our listeners, because I think we got a lot of feedback on that and the way you reinvent yourself. Shifting gears a little bit, I mean, in your professional, perhaps personal life as well, I'm sure you've encountered many people that needed your help to manage stress every day of their lives, different types of stress, actually. And I know that you believe that mental well-being, which keeps growing after COVID-19, is today the number one issue that people have to deal with in their lives. So can you share with our listeners some very practical recommendations on how to take care of yourself, of your mental wellness? You mentioned already a couple of things before, in a previous question, but what else would you do?
I have so many things here, Jean-Philippe, and they fall under the 5 pillars that I have been speaking about for many years, which are rest, fuel, hydrate, oxygenate, and simplify. But I'll give you some particular facts about each one of those that are quite easy to incorporate into your routine. So with sleep, the ideal length for the norm in the population is 8 hours and 15 minutes.
Yep.
More than that can actually reduce your mental wellness. So oversleeping is not good. But, we say at least 7 to 8 hours. And that's to do with the time that it takes for the brain to clean itself overnight.
Yep.
But there's another quick tip that really makes a difference, which is if you have regular sleeping time and waking time within a 1 hour window, that seems to have a really beneficial effect as well.
Yeah.
And then with fuel, that's basically your diet. So I'd just like to preface that by saying that even though your brain is very small in your body, it's the hungriest organ in your body.
Yeah.
So it's using up 20 to 30% of what you eat. And so to fuel your brain as effectively as possible, it's ideal to be mostly plant-based and make sure that you're trying to eat a variety of 30 different plants per week. But that's 30. Not just vegetables. It includes coffee, dark chocolate, all the grains like rice, lentils, quinoa, spices, black pepper, but also...
Oil as well?
No.
No oil. Oh, okay. No olive oil. Okay.
No. So olives rather than olive oil.
Okay.
So actually, but I mean the good oils are good for you too.
Yep.
But I don't think they count in the 30 different plants.
Okay.
And then eating fermented food is also very good for your brain. So kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, etc. There's so much evidence coming out now about how I think we're on the tip of the iceberg, but I've become obsessed with eating mushrooms.
Mushrooms?
So yes.
Particular mushrooms? I mean, do you have a specific set of selection of mushrooms you take? Or?
I mean, I think the more exotic ones are better, but even just eating regular mushrooms, champignons, the average champignon is fine.
Champignon de Paris, okay, very good.
So, things like reishi and shiitake and oyster, but really just eating 2 cupfuls of mushrooms per week.
Yep.
So I think for dietary things, that's probably quite a lot. And then hydration is really important because it's important for the obvious reasons, but also the chemical and electrical messages that pass between neurons, there needs to be enough lubrication for that to happen properly.
As you can see, I keep drinking all the time during my podcast,
same.
all the time.
Yeah,
You
me
too.
So we should be drinking half a litre of water for every 15 kilos of our body weight per day. And if you drink a lot of coffee or you live in a really hot place, then you probably need to drink more. Oxygenation, this used to be very much about doing 150 minutes of aerobic exercise per week and doing some strength training. But actually post-COVID, what we've learned is that if your exercise is too high intensity, it becomes counterproductive because it's producing stress hormones. So now it's become more about, especially because a lot more people work from home, don't be sedentary. Make sure you're getting up and walking around. Make sure you're trying to get 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day.
And outside and in the natural, if you can, right? In the greens as well.
That's a whole separate point, which is so beneficial. In nature, absolutely. And outside, but not in a polluted area, because if there's pollution in your area, which you can check using apps, then it actually reduces the growth factors that help your nerve cells to grow. So outside, as long as it's near a large body of water or lots of large trees. But just separate from exercise, just time in nature is just showing like massive benefits for mental health. And then apart from just movement, making sure we're breathing deeply, because when we're stressed, we do shallow breathing. There's actually shocking statistics about how much people hold their breath when they're reading emails or they're looking at social media. So becoming conscious of that. And then the last thing I was going to say was time in nature. So
wow, we have we have our work cut out for the days, Tara.
But just pick two or three of those things and start incorporating them.
No, it's wonderful. Actually, it's really connecting really nicely with many episodes we had between Adriana Fington and others, talking about the same things again and again about the importance of that. You share many incredible exercises again in your book. For all of you who want to learn more about, there's so much in the book. I'd love you to share one with the listeners about how you can process both negative and positive events using your different senses. I think you ask the reader to write down 4 quadrants and label them. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. So could you share one exercise actually on how to do that in a more integrated way?
So let's just start by defining those so people know what they would be writing into each quadrant. So physical is literally what you feel in your body. Mental is about your thought processes. Emotional is about your feelings. And then spiritual is either something that's not described by those 3, or for people that have spiritual beliefs, it's something in your spirit, or it's if you don't, then it's something in your values. And so what I ask people to do is think of a time that life, whether it's, usually I ask them to think of a work example that things were not going well. It was difficult. Things weren't in flow. Team wasn't pulling together. Results weren't good. And we always start with the negative one, because remember about abundance, we don't want to start with positive and end up negative, because that will have an effect on the brain. I ask people to close their eyes and immerse themselves in that memory for 1 minute. And then at the end of the minute, to write down how it felt in your body, what was going on in your thoughts, your feelings, and your spirit. And then I actually do say, like, take 10 deep breaths, or just like jump up and down 5 times to just get rid of that negativity, and then repeat. So draw another quadrant labeled the same, and think of a time that things were going really well, you were at your best, people were collaborating, results were great. Close your eyes and immerse yourself in that memory for a minute. And then at the end of the minute, write down how that felt in the 4 quadrants. And there's literally no right or wrong answer. I've heard people say that it was exactly the same in all the quadrants, or that there's, one quadrant that's different, or, for me, what I learned is that the biggest difference between those 2 is my physicality. So my posture changes, my eye contact changes, how much I smile. And that's kind of a little bit easier to force yourself to turn that around. A negative spiral in your thoughts is very difficult to turn that around at the time. But, sitting up straighter, giving eye contact, smiling, that helps me to then move through the other quadrants over maybe a day or 2.
Super helpful framework, super helpful exercise, I think, Tara. Thinking about what you just said, we had a great dialogue again with Barbara Fredrickson, and I think there was, better than I do, there's been a lot of research on the fact that I think it takes 3 times more positive events in your daily life than to compensate one negative things happening to you every day. And so it means as well that, in a way, I think you're responsible for creating more positive moments in your life as well. That's my deep belief. Yeah. And in a way, maybe something else I would add to your arsenal of tips and tools is make sure you also avoid people with toxicity, meaning people who are actually propagating negative ideas, negative
100%.
thoughts all the time. And you know those people because you met with them, and every time you met with them, you feel so depressed, so sad. So, and it's not about not having empathy with people. I love all the people I can meet with, but when some of the people get in that spiral, and of course we can help them somehow, maybe with some other support of psychology and psychiatry as well sometimes. But I think you should be a master of your life as well, of avoiding as much as you can to not get into that spiral of negativity. I don't know what you think about that as well.
I completely agree with you. I think it's at least 3 positive things for one negative. It might be more. Might be. I've heard 7 sometimes, and that makes And you know, the brain is geared for survival, so that makes sense. So we do have to, in the modern day, kind of be very conscious of overriding that. And something that I've learned in relation to like toxicity from other people is it's very easy to take it personally, but actually almost 100% of the time it's saying a lot more about what's going on for that person than you.
Absolutely.
And if we can remember that, then we don't take on the toxicity, and maybe we can actually help the person, or maybe we realise that it's not right for us to, you know, put our energy in that place. But no, I completely agree with you. I almost, it's so obvious to me that I didn't say it, if you know what I mean.
I know. It's natural for you because you've been already on this path for a number of years, Tara. So last couple of questions, unfortunately, because the time is flowing very fast. You've done a lot of work, love to come back to that, coaching growing leaders from the business community now for a number of years and from other circles, which is very different from where you started, as you said, right, in terms of your professional career. In a way, you moved from having an impact one patient at a time as a psychiatrist. Super hard job, by the way, and I've got a lot of admiration myself for people doing that job every day. And you've been moving to a place where you can have an impact, hopefully, on millions of people through your books, your podcasts, you know, videos, and more. And so my question is, do you have any regrets changing, in a way, the course of your life now? And in a way, you know, if I may, in a way, not applying your strengths to the people who may need the most from you. Maybe I'm just provoking you on purpose, right? Compared to, you know, people who, I'm not saying they don't need you, they all need you as well. So what's your take on that?
I have absolutely no regrets. I don't believe in having regrets. I believe in, you know, if you make a mistake, learning from it and maybe changing something. But yeah, I agree with you. The reason that I've started doing so much, well, the reason I wrote the book in the first place, but then also that I've started doing so much more free things on social media is so that, you know, I'm having the widest impact possible. And through the podcast, you know, that's obviously free. So yeah, I guess I went from focusing on, you know, a very like narrow group of people that have big impact, but then continuing to do that and then just doing much broader, sort of higher volume, further reach things as well, because that feels right as well.
No regrets, like me, no regrets at all on the life we had and we keep having and defining. So very last question, Tara, in a way maybe back to the bathroom, who knows? I'm told that you are supposed to be the reincarnation of your late grandmother, and that you more than accomplish your dreams with your studies and PhD. So as you paint a new visual board every year, this is the point, did you see the need for you to climb your second mountain? You know, this is this wonderful book from David Brooks, The Second Mountain.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, what will you find at the top of this second mountain, Tara? What's for you?
Well, I've already started the climb, because actually I was a guest on another podcast and I was getting this repeated question, are you going to write another book? And you know, in my mind, I've done that. I've written the book that I wanted to write, and I wanted to have my own podcast, which, as you know, I've now released season 1 of the podcast, and it charted to #1 in the UK and the US.
Which is a wonderful podcast, by the way, for all listeners.
Thank you. And so at the top of the mountain, to address what you said about reaching as many people as possible, is a TV show. So yeah, working towards that now.
That's next. Okay, TV show.
Yeah.
Well, Tara, looking forward to watch this TV show, absolutely, on top of the podcast.
Thank you.
It's been a delight to have you again on the podcast. And
Thank you
it's been
so
wonderful,
much.
To get all your practices and actually all your wisdom of neuroscience applied to all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.